Dave Peshkin is going to talk about the life cycle of thin surface treatments. Dave's a pavement engineer. He's been working with applied pavement technology for over 23 years. He's got a background in design, evaluation, and forensics.
All right, so this morning's assigned topic is shown here. Hopefully I have something to share with you that will be of interest. In any event, thank you for at least being here. I'm going to cover these topics here. First, since life cycle is in the title, I'll talk a little bit about life cycle, some of the factors that impact the life of a thin surfacing and a preservation treatment, why it's important, and then its impact on determining subsequent treatment strategies. So let's start with life cycle. You know, like any good researcher, I looked up life cycles, and this was the first thing that showed up, but it's not the life cycles that we're thinking of here. So what about preservation treatment life cycles? The life cycle of thin surface treatment, or really any treatment, is shown here, and it's, you know, mirrors the life cycle of a pavement. We design them with surface treatments or preservation treatments in general. We're also selecting the project and making sure it's a good candidate, and then going into this cycle. But we design them, we build them, we take advantage of the benefits that are provided by those treatments, we maintain them if that's appropriate, and then we try and address the question at the end of the loop of what's next. And so we'll look at that as well. So what do we mean by the life cycle of a preservation treatment? And I think probably in a little bit of simplification, what I'm really talking about with the life cycle is the actual life of the treatment and how long that treatment lasts. So, you know, in this graphic you can see the life cycle of a pavement that's shown by the master performance curve, and then the life of some of the subsequent treatments, and those treatments those lives are shown here as the time, say, before the next treatment is applied. Now, you know, when we think about the factors that are important in evaluating treatment life cycles, one of the things that may come to your mind is life cycle cost or cost benefit. And that's something that I'm not really going to talk about, but I did want to mention them. When we think about a treatment life or its life cycle, we also think about how much it costs to get that life out of the treatment. And we also want to think about benefit, or what we got in terms of improved performance or extended life in spending that money and placing that treatment. Those are all important, but those topics aren't what I'm covering here. Some assumptions about life, these may be obvious, but you know, I think there's sort of, we need to have a shared understanding. And the first assumption is that longer lives are better. Now, it may not always be the case. You may have an application where you're trying to get a certain specific extension of life before you do something else. So you may not want 10 years if you only need 5 years. But again, that's not the case that I'm trying to look at here. So if longer lives are better, how do we get long life? How do we achieve the maximum life cycle from that treatment? And I've identified a few considerations here. And of course, the first one is we need to make good decisions about what projects we're placing our preservation treatments on. So good project selection is certainly a key to long life and to achieving the maximum life cycle or life out of that treatment. Of course, good treatment selection is also important. Are we placing the right treatment for that consideration? That's going to help us to get the longest life possible as well. Is it placed properly is a consideration. So good construction practices are another key. And as long as I was going with good project selection, treatment selection, and construction practices, I also thought, well, you probably need some good luck as well. Things that maybe aren't under your control, like weather and the mood of the people placing the work and so forth. So I don't want to discount the possible contribution of good luck to achieving long life in preservation. It's also useful to think about what impacts treatment life. These are partly covered in the previous slide, but there are a lot of factors that affect how our preservation treatments perform. Certainly using quality materials is going to be a part of it. The traffic that goes over that treatment might impact its performance. How you take care of the treatment subsequently could have an effect. Construction quality and maintenance variability would be a factor, and the environment. And when I look at this, I always think about, from an agency perspective, which of these do you have control over, and which of these are really just variables that are beyond your control. And certainly in terms of getting the most life out of your preservation treatments or your surface treatments, you'd want to focus in the areas where you do have some control and try and make sure that you do everything you can to get that life. There is an issue of what we mean by life or treatment life, and I wanted to address that next. So what is life? It seems like a really big question. Again, if you go on the internet, you might get distracted. I guess I'm easily distracted. But focusing on treatment life, there's a few concepts that may not be universally shared that I want to share with you how I think about them. So what is the life of a surface treatment? Well, one way to look at it is when the treatment has to be replaced. So you place a treatment, you get a certain number of years out of it, and there's a lot of information, a lot of research, a lot of reports that talk about how long a treatment lasts. When a treatment must be replaced would be one approach to what the life of that treatment is. I think that's fairly generic, maybe doesn't give you a lot of insights. Another way of looking at it is you place the treatment at a certain condition. When does the pavement reach that condition again? And if you think back to a few slides ago, there was a graph of the initial master performance curve, and then at some point a treatment was placed. The pavement deteriorated until it reached that original condition, and then another treatment was placed. So another way of looking at treatment life would be, whether it's a condition index or some other measure of performance, whatever triggered the placement of that treatment, when you re-reach that condition level, you've reached the life of that treatment, you could place another treatment. Another way of looking at it is when there's no remaining trace of the treatment. So, and I've heard this in the past. I don't hear it as often as I do anymore. But some obvious examples are, if you place a chip seal or a slurry seal or even a fog seal, the life of that treatment is over when you don't see that treatment anymore. So when it's completely worn away. Thinking about that last one in particular, looking at these examples, crack sealing on the right, I think that's a slurry on the left. Where are these treatments in their life cycle since you can still see them? Maybe sort of a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer quite yet. This is what I would like to share with you in thinking about treatment life. I think the most important factor is, why did you place that treatment? Did you place the treatment to seal the surface against water? Did you place the treatment, as Robert just talked about, to improve friction? Did you place the treatment because the pavement had reached a performance trigger value that said this is when we apply preservation, and so you applied a treatment and you realized an improvement in performance? So think about, why did you place that treatment, and then the life of that treatment is the time over which that treatment serves the purpose for which it was intended. So if you place the treatment to improve friction, the life of that treatment is until the pavement deteriorates and you don't have that level of friction anymore. If you placed it to keep water out, the life of that treatment is until the time when water is getting back into the pavement. It's no longer serving the purpose for which it was intended. You may still see signs of the treatment. It may not match up with 5 to 8 years or 3 to 7 years or 1 to 15 years, as we heard about. But if it's no longer serving the purpose for which it was placed, life is over, at least for that treatment. What's the importance of life? Well, if we know how long treatments last, not only just how long they're supposed to last, but what we're actually getting out of those treatments, we can use that information in a number of different ways. And I've suggested a few of them. I don't think this list is at all exhaustive, but you could certainly use this information about treatment life for planning and budgeting. You could use, and we do use this information in pavement management processes. We have tables that relate various treatments to the life extension or the benefit of applying that treatment. And we can also use the information about treatment life to anticipate what we're going to place next. The next question then is, how long do thin surface treatments last? And in putting the presentation together, I immediately went to the internet and was going to introduce in the next slide a bunch of logos of incontinence support items, and because the answer is it sort of depends, but you'll be happy to know I didn't go there. So how long do treatments last? And yes, the answer is it depends, and yes, the answer is it depends on a lot of those factors that were in that previous graphic about materials and environment and traffic and construction quality and how we maintain these treatments. And that's why we get a lot of variability when we see reports of how long treatments last. But what numbers do we use? We can, if we have a range of 1 to 15, do we use an average number? Do we use a modal number? Do we use the entire range in our planning and budgeting purposes? Do we use the time until the next treatment? And maybe that's something that we haven't really studied very much. But I don't have the answer here because it really does depend. Of course, we'd all like to have better information, and the reality is it's probably not a deterministic, definitive answer. It's probably something that's more probabilistic, that has a mean value and a range associated with that. But one of the important implications in thinking about preservation in general, thin surface treatments in particular, is when is it time to place the next, to take the next action or look at subsequent strategies. And so some thoughts about that. In order to, the next strategy is based on the condition of the pavement at the end of the life of the first strategy. And by all means, you should consider whether the pavement is still a good candidate for preservation. You may not be familiar with the practice that's taking place on the other side of the country. Washington State has introduced their one-touch policy where they no longer can place a rehabilitation treatment on a road until they've done at least one cycle of pavement preservation. So they're going to maintenance first or preservation first. They're mandating an application of a preservation treatment first. But there's no reason that you have to stop there. You may be able to place subsequent treatments if the pavement's in the right condition. And that goes back to, is it in good condition, and does it meet all those criteria? So if the pavement is still a good candidate for preservation, you can go and place the same treatment, or it may not be a good candidate for that same treatment. Maybe you'll place something else. So in thinking about why we place the treatment, are those needs still there, or is something else appropriate? What treatments work well in the preservation universe as the next treatment? I've identified a few here in the thin or really thin surface treatment category. This list is by no means exhaustive, but these are things you can place multiple fog seals or rejuvenating seals, multiple chip seals or the many variants of chip seals, on top of each other. Slurry and micro, micro in particular you can build up, and thin and ultra-thin overlays are all candidates. And if we stray from thin surface treatments, we can also do crack sealing on concrete pavements. We can do diamond grinding, multiple applications. So a lot of treatments in the preservation universe can be placed in multiple applications. What to look for, certainly evaluate if the pavement is past the preservation window in terms of ongoing structural damage, or if there are conditions that need to be removed before you place preservation, which would mean taking off the first preservation treatment. A little bit harder is looking at stripping potential, but if it survived a first treatment, it should survive multiple treatments. What to look at? These are some things that you might see with the application of a thin surfacing that are not indications that you can't place another one, but maybe indications that you need to take some steps to address that treatment before you place the next treatment. Bleeding, delamination is one, bleeding is another that you can compensate for. Rutting is something that we can address in our subsequent preservation treatments. Certainly roughness, and it's hard to get a good picture of roughness, so I had to simulate one here. But this, you can, if your road is rough but it's otherwise structurally sound and doesn't meet some of those other conditions, it's a candidate for a subsequent preservation treatment. We're almost at the end. Let's do a quick review. I talked about life cycle and said that what I really mean is treatment life. And what I'd like you to think about in terms of treatment life is when that treatment is no longer serving the purpose for which it was placed. Not when you can see it, not maybe some of the other factors, but if you placed it for a specific reason, when it's no longer serving that purpose, you're at the end of that life. And we talked about the factors that affect that, some of which are under your control and others you're at the mercy of nature. And then finally, the end of a treatment life does not necessarily mean that you're at the end of the pavement life, or you're at the end of your ability to use preservation as a strategy to manage your pavements. So I encourage you to look at the end of the treatment life as an opportunity to consider whether preservation is still appropriate and what you need to do to possibly put down a subsequent preservation treatment. Questions?
Got us on time. We're like 20 minutes. Thanks, Dave.
20:07.
You'll be around.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.